The late afternoon sun was soft that day, brushing its golden warmth over the maple trees that lined my son's backyard. I had baked my famous apple pie, the one Daniel always loved when he was little, and wrapped it carefully in a towel so it would stay warm. It had been weeks since I last saw my grandchildren, and I thought a surprise visit would make everyone happy. As I walked through the open gate, I heard laughter drifting from the patio. I smiled to myself, picturing the children playing, maybe Daniel grilling like he used to when his father was alive. But before I could step forward, a voice stopped me cold. It was Daniel's wife, Clara, sharp and clear. "Honestly, Daniel, why is she even still alive?" The words hit me like a slap. I froze behind the lilac bushes, my heart thudding painfully against my ribs. "Clara," my son sighed. "Don't say it like that." "I'm serious," she snapped. "We can't keep doing this. Her house, her savings. We could finally fix this place up and pay off the credit cards. But as long as she's still around, everything's tied up. It's cruel to say, but she's just lingering." I gripped the towel tighter, my knuckles white. The sweet smell of apple pie suddenly turned bitter in the air. Then Daniel's voice came again, quieter, but colder. "I know. I'll talk to her soon. Maybe convince her the nursing home is the best place for her. She's getting forgetful. It won't be hard." Forgetful? The word pierced me deeper than I expected. Yes, my hands trembled sometimes, and I occasionally lost my glasses, but my mind was sharp. Sharper than they thought. For a moment, I wanted to turn around and leave, to pretend I hadn't heard. But something inside me refused. I straightened my back, wiped my eyes, and walked toward the patio. The wooden boards creaked under my shoes, and they both looked up in surprise. Clara's face flushed pale. Daniel forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom, what a surprise." I smiled back, calm and soft, as if my heart hadn't just been ripped in two. "I thought I'd bring something sweet for you all," I said, lifting the pie onto the table. "It's still warm." Clara mumbled a thank you, and Daniel asked about my drive, pretending everything was normal. I played along, my voice steady, my hands gentle as I cut the pie and served it. But I saw the guilt flicker in his eyes every time he looked at me. When I finally went inside to wash my hands, I looked at the family photos on the wall, the ones I had framed, paid for, and gifted them years ago. I touched Daniel's face in one of them, my son as a baby in my arms. And in that moment, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not be cast aside like a burden. They had no idea who they were underestimating. That night, sleep would not come. I lay awake in my small bed, the old clock ticking beside me like a heartbeat I no longer trusted. The words I'd overheard replayed again and again. Why is she even still alive? Each time I remembered, my chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I tried to remind myself that Daniel was my boy. The same child who used to run to me after school, clutching drawings of us hand in hand. The boy who cried when I sold my wedding ring to pay for his college tuition. How could that boy grow into a man who saw his mother as nothing more than a burden? The next morning, I stood by the kitchen window, watching the sunlight pour over my garden. The roses were in bloom, red, fierce, and alive. I found comfort in them. Their thorns reminded me that beauty didn't mean weakness. That week, I began to notice small things I'd overlooked before. Clara's fake kindness, for one. Her sugary smiles now carried a bitter aftertaste. Every "how are you, Mom?" felt rehearsed. When she helped me with my coat, her hands lingered too long on my pockets, as if checking for something valuable. Then came the missing heirlooms. My mother's pearl brooch disappeared first, then my late husband's watch. When I asked Clara about it, she gave me that tight, polite smile. "You must have misplaced them, dear. You know how forgetful you can be." Forgetful. There was that word again. They wanted me to doubt myself, to believe I was slipping into confusion. I said nothing, only nodded and pretended to agree. But I wasn't confused. I was watching, listening, learning. One afternoon, Daniel came by with a stack of papers. "Just some legal stuff," he said casually. "It's for your medical power of attorney. You know, in case something happens." I took the papers with trembling hands, pretending not to notice how he avoided my eyes. After he left, I called the only person I trusted, Edward. He had been my late husband's best friend. A lawyer long retired but still sharp as a blade. When I told him everything, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he said, softly but firmly, "Don't sign anything, Margaret. Not yet. Let's meet tomorrow." That night, I sat alone by the fireplace, staring at the flickering flames. They danced like memories, bright and painful. I realized how deeply I had been fooled by love, how my devotion had blinded me to their greed. Still, I did not cry. Instead, a calmness settled over me. They thought they were writing the end of my story, but they were wrong. The woman they thought was fading was only beginning to awaken. When I met Edward the next day, it felt like seeing an old photograph come to life. His hair had turned white, his shoulders stooped a little, but his eyes were the same, steady, kind, and sharp. He listened quietly as I told him everything, from the words I'd overheard in the backyard to the missing heirlooms and suspicious papers. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Margaret," he said gently, "I think it's time we teach them that kindness has limits." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not a polite, grandmotherly smile, but a real one. "Then let's begin," I whispered. We spent hours going through my files, deeds, and bank accounts. Edward helped me gather proof that Daniel had been siphoning money from the joint savings account I had trusted him to manage. He also discovered that the house, my own house, the one I had transferred into Daniel's name to save on taxes, still had legal loopholes that could return it to me. Over the next few weeks, I played my role perfectly. I smiled when Clara mocked me softly. I nodded when Daniel said, "Mom, maybe the care home would be good for you." I even pretended to forget small things, a clever touch that made them careless around me. Meanwhile, Edward and I worked in silence. He helped me rewrite my will, creating a trust that protected every last cent. I donated a large portion of my savings to the town's orphanage, the same one I used to volunteer at when Daniel was a boy. I set up scholarships for young widows and single mothers, women like me, who once struggled quietly but never gave up. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace. About leaving something good behind when my own family had chosen greed over love. When Daniel and Clara finally brought me the medical papers again, I smiled sweetly. "Of course, dear," I said, pretending to read while they watched eagerly. What they didn't know was that Edward had already prepared my own version of those documents. Identical on the outside, but with one key difference. Mine revoked any power they thought they would have over me. The following week, I packed a small suitcase, left a warm pie on their counter, and slipped away quietly. Edward met me at the station and drove me to his little cottage near the sea. It was peaceful there, the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Every morning, I walked along the shore, watching the waves crash and fade. I thought about the family I had loved more than myself, and how easily they had forgotten me. But I didn't hate them anymore. I simply pitied them, because someday, when they finally reached for everything they thought was theirs, they would realize I had already taken back the one thing they could never own, my dignity. And that, I decided, was the sweetest revenge of all. 2 months passed quietly by the sea. The salt air cleared my lungs, and the mornings were filled with the sounds of gulls and crashing waves. Edward would bring me tea each evening, and we'd sit by the fire, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent. For the first time in years, I felt invisible in the best way, free from judgment, from pity, from manipulation. Then one morning, Edward came in holding a letter. "It's time," he said softly. He had sent the final papers the night before, my will, my legal notice, and the letters I had written for Daniel and Clara. Everything was done. My affairs were sealed, my accounts protected, and my story complete. That night, I went to sleep with a strange calm, knowing I had done all I could. A week later, my heart simply stopped. Peacefully. Without pain. Edward found me by the window, my hands folded on my lap, a faint smile on my face. He carried out my final wishes exactly as I had written. When Daniel and Clara received the call from Edward's office, they rushed there in shock. "She's gone," Daniel asked, his voice trembling. Perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps fear of what came next. "Yes," Edward replied evenly. "She passed away peacefully. But she left instructions for you both." They followed him into a quiet conference room. On the table lay 2 envelopes sealed in my handwriting. Edward slid them forward. "Before we read her will," he said, "please open these." Daniel opened his first. My letter was short. "My dear son, I heard every word that day in your backyard. I saw what greed has done to you, and it broke me. But I choose not to hate you. I choose to leave behind not bitterness, but truth. The house you thought you owned was never yours to sell. The funds you withdrew have been traced and will be donated to the children's shelter. What remains of my estate will go to those who still remember compassion. Something I once hoped you would never lose. You asked why I was still alive. I lived long enough to remember who I raised and who you became. Mother." Clara's letter was even shorter. To Clara, "You will find that what you built on lies cannot stand. Be kind to your children, or you will one day hear them speak of you the way you spoke of me." Edward then opened the official document and began to read. The scholarships, the orphanage donations, the restoration of my home as a community shelter. All of it was listed, signed, and sealed. Daniel sat frozen, tears slipping down his face as his wife stared at the floor, pale and silent. When it was over, Edward looked up quietly. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. You just forgot to see it." Outside, the autumn wind howled softly through the trees, carrying away the last leaves. And somewhere beyond that, I like to believe my spirit smiled, not out of vengeance but out of peace. Because I had finally found it.